Welcome to Open Range. I'm your host, Gary Emineth. Today we're going to be talking to Rebecca Binstock, who's the Executive Director of the North Dakota Ethics Commission. Have to do a lot of politics. The citizens a while back voted this in effect, and there's a lot of things swirling around about an annual report they've come up, but also just what do they do, who are they, and why are people not going to jail for doing something bad or whatever. So we're going to try to drill down on that a little bit, and then we're also going to get a healthy living tip by Dr. Jake Schmitz. Rebecca, welcome to Open Range.
Thank you for having me on, Gary. It's nice to be here.
So before we dig into the Ethics Commission and what your job is and all that's going on with that, tell our viewers a little bit about yourself.
Sure. As you said, my name is Rebecca Binstock, and I am originally from Bismarck. I grew up in Bismarck, went away, went to school. I did go to the University of Minnesota for my undergraduate degree, but I also then went to law school up at UND and worked in the federal system for a while and came over to the state system. I started with the Ethics Commission in September of 2022, I believe. I always mark things by my kids' birthdays, and that's how I tend to remember that date. So that's just a little bit about me.
So you're an attorney then, and you went to law school, and now you're in the Ethics Commission, and you deal with, when there's ethics complaints, there's all these slicing and dicing of words, just like passing the law in a bill. And he said, she said, whatever. Talk a little bit about, so that background you have obviously helps and plays a part in understanding the moral code that goes with someone that would serve in office and the Ethics Commission. Talk a little bit about when it was formed. You came, you said in 22. The citizens actually put this in play, I think it was about 2018 or so. So they passed, and there was a lot of complaining in North Dakota that we're good old clean, nobody does anything bad here. And I'm not saying there were a bunch of criminals or anything like that, but there is something about wanting to hold elected officials to a standard. And talk to us a little bit about who falls underneath your purview, if you will, that you're wanting to say, these are the people. In other words, someone's going to complain about Gary's bad talk show host. I hope they don't.
Don't do it to me. Don't do it to me.
Yeah, don't complain on me. But is it just elected officials, and how does that play out as far as the role in the Ethics Commission? What it is?
So that's a really good question, Gary. And so if we look back at, in 2018, the voters put the Ethics Commission into place. But that was in November of 2018. And then we had our legislative session in 2019, and there were some parameters laid out by the legislature that year. And our commissioners weren't appointed until late 2019. The first chance, I believe their first meeting was in September of 2019. And I didn't come on for quite a few years later, but those first few years were really trying to get the organization going. And complaints started coming in. They started trickling in 2019 against the individuals who I'll talk about briefly. And then those really started to uptick in October of 2022. That's when we started to get a number of complaints coming in, a significant number. What does that mean? What does it mean to have a complaint, and who can bring something to the Ethics Commission, or what can we look into? So the Ethics Commission was established as a state entity, meaning that we only have authority, or I guess investigative authority, or jurisdiction is the fancy legal word, over statewide elected officials. So that's going to be our governor, secretary of state, ag commissioner. And then we also have jurisdiction over legislators. We have jurisdiction over lobbyists. And then it also includes anybody who is appointed to serve in an executive branch agency. So that might be a director, it might be a deputy director, but anybody who is appointed in the executive branch. The individuals who we don't have jurisdiction over are local individuals who are serving on a school board, or if they are part of a county commission. The Ethics Commission's jurisdiction does not extend to those individuals. However, we do get a number of calls about local issues that do pop up, particularly with conflicts of interest that happen in North Dakota. So that's our scope.
I think the governor, at one point, I remember, he appoints people, to 1,700 people to all these various boards. Would that fall underneath the purview?
Yes. So that's a great question.
All those other ones.
Yes.
Okay.
So anybody who's appointed to serve on a licensing board, or a licensing board is probably the best example. So you have the board who license occupational therapists or doctors in our state, engineers. All of those individuals are appointed by the governor, and so they fall under the jurisdiction of the Ethics Commission.
So so obviously it was formed, the voters passed it in. It was there was a lot of out-of-state interest in it, and as a conservative, a lot of people said that was just the left wanting to come after a Republican state, and they targeted these Republican states. I don't know if that was fact or fiction, but that was the chatter out in the perimeter. But all of a sudden, the Ethics Commission, citizens said, hey, it needs to be dealt with, so you have to do it. Legislature then funds it to some degree. We'll talk about that a little bit further. But what becomes your standard? Do you go to the 10 Commandments in the Old Testament? Do you go to something Minnesota does? I mean, where do you come up with this grid that you would say this is or doesn't fit?
So that's a greite question, Gary. Again, you're full of good questions today. So when we talk about what rules we should have for public officials, our guidepost is the language of the Constitution. And so it says it directs that the Commission can adopt ethics rules related to transparency, corruption, elections, and lobbying. We call those our 4 buckets. The Commission has adopted rules to date that govern lobbying in the state, govern conflicts of interest, and what we call quasi-judicial proceedings. That is a very legal term. I apologize for using it, but it's basically those licensing procedures, or if you have some sort of hearing before the PSC or the Industrial Commission, those are all governed by those rules. And so how do we develop what those are? Thankfully, we have 47 other states who have state ethics commissions, and we can look and see what ethics rules they have passed, and then we can mirror those. So we call our sister ethics commission the New Mexico Ethics Commission because it was passed by the voters in New Mexico the same month that the North Dakota Ethics Commission was put in. And so that's one of the ethics commissions that we look at. And we look at what other rules should there be to provide voters of North Dakota information about the people that they are voting into office and that they are who are making decisions on their behalf in state government.
You talked about a board. How big is your staff? Because I think of 1,700 people the governor appoints. You got 47 senators, you got 94 House members, you got and so I'm just complaining about that legislator, and I send it to you. You have to do something with it. What kind of staffing do you have to be able to deal with it? But some of them are frivolous, obviously, because people have an axe to grind. I don't like what they made the decision on, but that affects me personally. But what kind of staffing do you have, and how do you deal with those opportunities, if you will, that you have to deal with?
Yes. If we look at, first of all, the commission consists of 5 individuals. Now, those individuals are not in the office on a daily basis. Most of them have other jobs that they do. They're part of their community, or they are individuals who retired who have really developed a good ethical sense based on their professional experiences through life. And so we have 5 commissioners. They meet monthly, usually for a day, and they are the ones that make the decisions. They are the ones that adopt rules. They are the ones that do the decision making. But what we have as far as a staff is concerned to support those 5 commissioners, we have myself as executive director, we have an in-house general counsel that is full-time, and then we have an operations administrator. So when we do get those complaints, Gary, that you talked about that come in, there's really 2 individuals who are dealing with those. That is the general counsel and myself as executive director. So you mentioned the number of people we oversee. We've estimated, and we've worked with the governor's office, I think we oversee approximately 3,000 individuals in the state at the state level. And we have two individuals with a legal background to do that, myself and our general counsel. Our operations administrator really focuses on the day-to-day things, procurement, making sure that everything is, all our travel vouchers are done, those sorts of administrative type things. So we have a very small staff. We do also utilize contract attorneys. So we do engage, I think we've done maybe 3 or 4 different attorneys throughout the state that we have on a contract basis that we pay hourly to help us deal with complaints because we've had such an uptick in complaints over the last few years.
What kind of budget does your agency have? Do you know offhand?
Well, I have the appropriation.
That's perfect. That'd be perfect.
Let me
I'd
look.
like to know that because I'd be just curious because it just seems that's a big job. And just to have research and to be, because if it's a complaint, you don't just get to go, you don't get to call the Attorney General's office and tap into their resources, Bureau of Criminal Investigations.
No, in fact, we can't use BCI.
You can't.
We cannot. There's a specific, because we deal with civil issues. not criminal
I
violations.
see.
There's a really big distinction for that.
Explain that. Give me the 30-second on that, and then we're going to
Okay.
go to the break.
So an ethics commission violation is really a civil proceeding. It's not a criminal prosecution. And so we do have the ability to criminally refer something to a state's attorney or to the U.S. Attorney's Office if we need to. But primarily, we are dealing with a civil action, and it's against somebody in their personal capacity. So it's more akin to a civil proceeding. You get sued by your neighbor for trespass or something, than it is a criminal violation. And then there is a penalty associated with that in some instances, not all instances. So that's a really big distinction.
That is a very important.
It's a very important
We're going to pick
distinction.
up on that when we come back. So we've been talking to Rebecca Binstock, Executive Director of North Dakota Ethics Commission. I'm your host, Gary Emineth. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Open Range. I'm your host, Gary Emineth, talking to Rebecca Binstock, the Executive Director of the North Dakota Ethics Commission. Rebecca, before the break, we just started making a distinction between civil and criminal, and I think there's some confusion in that, because help our viewers get a little better clarity on that, because sometimes people say, that person, if we just take the Jason Doctor situation, which was fairly high-profile public out there, people refer similar things, and use that as maybe an analysis of where there's a line and there isn't a line.
Yeah. So the difference between the civil and the criminal. So the commission, as I said before the break, we look at a civil violation. So for instance, Jason Doctor, Representative Doctor, excuse me, he was prosecuted criminally. That was a referral that the Ethics Commission made. There's a specific standard that the commission looks at and determines if there is enough that has been presented during the commission's investigation that it needs to refer something criminally. And we're not saying at that point that somebody has committed a crime. We're just saying it is out of our area of expertise and it needs to be reviewed either by a state's attorney, by the Attorney General's office, or by the U.S. Attorney's Office, depending on who has jurisdiction over that issue. So that specifically with Representative Doctor, he did have that criminal prosecution that happened. But after that criminal prosecution happened, that matter still came back to the Ethics Commission, and the commission proceeded then to have a civil finding or an ethical finding that they ended up finding with Representative Doctor.
So when you actually have it's criminal, it comes back, there's really no, I don't want to say the word's not fair to say there's no teeth in it, because there's still the court of public opinion. If someone ethically violates something, it can become part of the mantra for them to have to get elected. That's the good thing about our system. But the Ethics Commission plays a much different role than I think perception from people.
Yeah, so that's actually really important, because really one of the roles of the commission, in fact, one of its biggest roles, is to provide information to the voters. And that was included in the constitutional provision. It's included in our mission statement. And so, yes, Representative Doctor, for instance, he didn't have any penalty associated with that. But the commission found that he violated an ethical rule. He had a conflict of interest when he voted on certain bills. However, there are certain ethical violations that do have a financial penalty that do attach to those. So there is still those teeth in that. But when we talk about the Ethics Commission having teeth, it really comes down to a relationship between the Ethics Commission providing information, accurate information, to voters, and them then being able to make those decisions with that information.
You can see where it would be politicized, because so often the Democrat challenging the Republican or vice versa. You see that on the national level maybe, and so you don't necessarily see that here because they're pretty much all Republicans. But I've been a little critical of my Republican friends at the legislature, where I just felt they haven't funded it to the tune, because there's been statements that North Dakota is not very clean. We got all kinds of problems ethically in the way we do politics. And people go, I don't know, I know Joe and I know Susie and they're not. But it seems like we just don't spend any money. And so legislatures, sometimes I think the legislators set themselves up for the fact that they don't fund it appropriately to support what you're doing. So talk about that budget. I'm critical.
Oh, man.
That's a statement I'm making, so I'm not putting the words in your mouth. But
I tend to not be critical, but there's actually a lot to break down there,
Yes,
right?
please,
And what
go
you
for it.
just said,
Yeah.
Gary, because you mentioned the fact that we know our legislators on a very personal basis, right? They might live down the street from you. You might know them from your golf league or from your book club. And we have that benefit in our state that we know them very personally. So I think Senator Devers says it perfectly, or he says, we really like to think well of the legislator that represents us, but then we get this mind or this collective about the legislature at whole that maybe looks different than our personal interaction. So I always like when he says that. It's a good little nugget. But when it comes to national scorecards with ethics in North Dakota, we do tend to score lower than most other states. And the reason is because we don't have protections or we don't have checks in place. And a lot of that comes from some of it comes from a lack of funding and the fact that we do have a small appropriation and then we also have a small staff. So we have small resources. So if we go back, I have the data. So in 2019, the legislature appropriated $517,000 for the Ethics Commission. In 2021, they appropriated $623,000. And if you think about the state budget, this is a very small portion.
not even a rounding error.
Nope. In 2023, it did increase almost double. It went up to $1,138,000. And a lot of that was due to the fact that we had an increasing caseload and we needed to bring in attorneys to do the work. And so we either needed to contract that out or we needed to have an attorney on staff. And so that was that big ask, or that was filled. And if we look at our 25-27 current biennium, we're at a little under 1.4 million. And there has been an increase in appropriations, but I'll tell you, during the 21-23 legislative session, we almost ran out of money. Had we not gotten emergency funding from the legislature, we would not have made it through the biennium with that amount of money. And so we did request this last legislative session, we did request an additional FTE. That FTE was going to focus on education so that we could then take our attorney time, our investigator time, and really get working through all the complaints that we have. But the legislature did not pass that. So we are stuck with our same level of staffing through the current biennium. And we're going to see what happens this next legislative session.
So they really choose not to fund it. I know there was a lot of animosity when it was passed in 2018. A lot of legislators spoke against. Don't have a problem, and I just recall the energy by legislators to push back, and it made them look bad. And to not be able to have at least a department to be able to fund it, that doesn't, I think it's bad for them related to the perception to the average voter out there. And what is the board of 5 members? Are they appointed by the governor?
Well, that's an interesting question. So they're appointed by the governor, consensus agreement between the governor, Senate Majority Leader, and Senate Minority Leader. So you have to have those 3 individuals who are currently Governor Armstrong, Leader Hogue, and Leader Hogan all have to agree on the individuals who are appointed. And the individuals who are appointed to serve on the commission, they cannot be a lobbyist, they can't be another elected official, they can't be a political party leader. They have certain standards that they have to meet for nonpartisan. Really, we want individuals who are able to critically think and be independent. But that's how those individuals are appointed.
How many complaints do you have? In other words, you said you had a spike in 23. Like, how many complaints came to you in 2023 that you had to deal with?
Yeah, so if we look at the data, prior to October of 2022, the commission had only received 16 complaints. So over, I don't quote my math, but from 2019 to 2022, there was only 16 complaints. It was very bare minimum. Most of those were dismissed very quickly, and one of them was informally resolved. So there really wasn't a lot there. In October, just in the month of October of 2022, I believe we received 12 complaints. I can't remember exactly.
So
it just
put it with an election. So it's October 22.
Yeah.
So sometimes people go, it's political. Okay.
Yep.
October,
and so
that's
then
a month before the election.
So in 2022, we received 14 complaints. In 2023, we had 15. In 2024, we had 41. And then by 2025, as of the day of our annual report, we had 74 complaints.
Wow, 74 in 2025?
Yes, and we're not obviously all the way through 2025.
And so how many get dismissed quickly, in other words? And talk to us about that for the
Yeah.
viewer to understand what that means. In other words, are you guys doing your job kind of thing?
Yes, so that's always a good question. Are we doing our job? So we do get, I don't like, and there's a characterization that complaints are frivolous. I don't particularly care for that characterization only because it's usually a citizen bringing a concern to the commission. Is it outside of our jurisdiction? Probably, sometimes it is. A good majority of the complaints that we do get are outside of our jurisdiction or are really just more of a moral code type thing than they are necessarily an ethical violation. And we try to get rid of those as quickly as we can because we don't want those hanging over individuals' heads. So if we look at over the span of the Ethics Commission, so from 2019 up until June 30th of 2025, which is the date of our annual report, we're able to get rid of those complaints that are outside the commission's jurisdiction that we can look at and we can say, yep, we need to get rid of this. We also still need to notify the individual who it's filed against, but we do tend to get rid of those. I believe we got rid of those in 29 days. So we are able to get rid of those fairly quickly. And one of the reasons it takes 29 days is because as executive director, I present those to the commission and I ask them to summarily dismiss those. I do have statutory authority to get rid of those on my own, but I feel that in an effort of transparency, it's better to have the commission doing it than me. I was not appointed by the governor or the Senate majority and the Senate minority leaders. I am an employee, so it should fall to them. However, there are instances where we need to go and corroborate evidence. We need to make sure that somebody isn't appointed, right? When we talk about those executive branch employees, we need to make sure maybe that what the complainant is bringing to us is not accurate because sometimes facts get wishy-washy, let's call it. So if we need to go and corroborate, it takes closer to 70 days to get rid of those. And keep in mind, it is two individuals who are going out and doing this.
That's crazy when you think of the limited staffing. We're going to go to the break. When we come back, I want to dig into this annual report so you can get the viewers to get their mind around what the implications are of this and the resources required. So, Rebecca, you have an annual report that just came out, like just a week or so ago.
Yep.
Anyway,
2 weeks.
Last few weeks.
It's about 2 weeks, yep.
So talk to us a little bit about what you want the viewers to understand, what's in there, what matters, and why it's important to have this.
Do you want me to take the whole time that
It's all yours.
So the whole purpose of the annual report is really to provide the citizens of North Dakota with kind of this is what we've been doing, this is what we do, and this is what some of the information, some of the data that we have based on our work. And so if you look through the annual report, it first gives you an overview of what the commission is, what its scope is, who serves on the commission, who are the individuals who are making these decisions. And then it gets into the nitty-gritty statistics specifically of complaints that we get. Those are individuals who bring something to our attention. And then it also talks about disclosures that are required under Ethics Commission rules and how we have gotten those in or what those numbers look like over the past. We really go from 2019 through June 30th of 2025. So there is a pretty big range. You can see right now you have our complaints. You can see how that number just drastically increases. Then we also have what we call our disclosures. So whenever there is a conflict of interest that somebody declares in our state for public officials, they need to disclose that to the commission. And so we have those on our website, but they're also included in our annual report. And then we also have when that happens in a quasi-judicial bias proceeding. So when that happens, and then the other thing that we do talk about is, I'm not sure if we include it in the annual report, but you can find it on our website, is meeting notices. So when a lobbyist does meet with a legislator or another public official, that information is then available on our website. So you can go and see who is meeting, what they're doing, how much they're spending, et cetera.
So walk me through that again. So what exactly did you just say?
Oh, yes. So meeting notices.
So if a legislator is having lunch with a lobbyist, is this more like an official published meeting?
Yep. So there are 3 types of interactions that individuals in North Dakota can have with our public officials. And they can, and it's under our lobbyist gifting rule, right? Because under the Constitution, anybody who's trying to influence government decisions is precluded from giving a gift or anything of value to a public official. But there are some instances that the Commission allows it. And really, those are educational settings, right? When you are providing a presentation or you're educating legislators on an important issue. And so in those instances, when you are providing a gift, mostly food and drink, right? Those are what's permissible. Then you have to file a meeting requirement with the Commission. And so we receive those on a daily basis from entities and organizations all across the state, and we post those to our website so that individuals know who is spending, who is interacting with our public officials. Now, if you go and sit down and have lunch with a legislator or another public official, those do not require meeting notices, but those are also capped on the amount that individuals can spend.
And what is that cap? Because I'm going to give you my scenario. I used to say this all the time. If what they should do is have a chart at the beginning of the legislative session. This legislator weighs this today. This is what he weighs at the end of the session. We're going to get them all on a scale together and add them up. And I used to say, those guys sell out so cheap for a cheap bottle of wine. So that was always my gripe to them.
Yeah.
So there's a limit. You're saying
there is a limit. There is a limit.
It never used to be, though. It never used to be.
Nope, not before the Commission came into existence. There was not a limit. And so now there is. It is $10. $10.
You can't even get to McDonald's for $10.
I know. So that is something that the Commission is looking at updating, that dollar amount.
I think you got to go at least 30.
We got to go at least, I was thinking like 20. But how they reached the $10 limit, this was not my decision, mind you. The previous executive director walked down to the Capitol cafeteria and figured out how much it would cost to get a sandwich, a soda, and a bag of chips. And it was at that point, back in 2019, 2020, it was under $10. Does that number need to be updated? Yes, the Commission is well aware of that. And so I anticipate
can it
that
include
will,
alcohol?
It actually can. That's another question that we get.
So you got to have a bottle of wine. So in other words, my glass of wine's got to be. You got to.
It's got to be. Yeah, it's got to be the low $6, whatever it is. Yes.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, but that's what it is, and it has to be consumed at the time. You can't take things with you. That is a question that we get. Can we take the leftover bottle of wine with us? No, you cannot.
$10 doesn't get you much.
And $10 doesn't get you much. So anyway, so there are those sorts of things, but we do have those meeting notices that get filed for those.
So those are on your website, so you can look at any time. That's to identify all elected officials and the different, whether it's the oil industry or the old guys like me, whatever that group is that takes care of all the old people stuff. So it identifies all of that. So there, we have that up on the screen. Yep. So you can look at that. And if I have a question, then I can reach out and ask, or to the lobbyist group or the association or Ethics Commission.
Yep.
Okay.
And then you can see the form, and it has most of the information. What we don't do is we don't include what public officials are at the event, that's more of a security concern than anything.
So. Okay, let's go back to the report. I don't want to run out of time here.
Yeah, the other thing we talk about in our annual report is advisory opinions that the Commission issues. So under legislation passed in 2021, the Ethics Commission issues advisory opinions, and the scope of those advisory opinions is on Ethics Commission rules or statutes in the Century Code related to elections, lobbying, transparency, and corruption. And in the annual report, we give a brief of the advisory opinions that the Commission has issued through June 30th of 2025. Since June 30th, the Commission has also issued a number of advisory opinions, and this is just one of our other operational highlights. This is something that we do that a lot of the public doesn't realize that we actually do. And so that also is not a constitutional directive of the Commission. That was put in place by statute in 2021. And that was really done in an effort to help public officials understand rules. Other ethics commissions across the country do this on a very regular basis.
Well, and I think I recall during the legislative session, you had some workshop with legislators. They do need to understand it because the laws change, your regulations change. And so that's part of your point is you do education, and getting your expensive attorney to not do it would be better than getting...
It would be much better to have somebody who has a background in education doing it. I do quite a bit of the education only because I do have a master's in education, so it seems fitting. But my time also needs to be focused on complaints and dealing with those sorts of things. So that's why we asked the legislature for an educator specifically to do that. Now, even without an educator, over the course of, I'm going to give you the dates, from January 1st of 2023 through June 30th of 2025, about a year and a half, we conducted 49 educational sessions across the state.
Wow.
And they were attended by an estimated 1,100 North Dakota residents.
Wow.
And those were for lobbyists, public officials, citizens of North Dakota, any organization. We go and we talk to the Lions Club or the Rotary Club. Anybody who wants to learn about what the Ethics Commission does, we will go and we'll either do an online presentation or we will go talk to them about what we do. So that is really a core component of what the Commission does, because if we have ethical decisions ahead of time, our public officials, if they know what is a yes and what is a no,
they want to know which line they
want to
can't
know.
cross. Fair enough. And
yes,
that's the way it
and
should
we
be. Yep.
understand that. And so if we could have somebody who's really focused on that, that would take some of our time and refocus it on complaints. Now, unfortunately, because the legislature didn't fund an education position, that really has fallen off our priority list this year because of just the sheer number of complaints that we need to get through and that we need to get investigations done on.
I would think that they would want to be more educated and be more informed, because there's nothing like being blindsided. And that, anyway, that's who am I to say. So what else do you have in your report? Before I'm going to ask you the last question I want you to answer is, if someone's out there and they want to file a complaint, what is the process? But if you got a little bit more in the report, I want to have you finish up there. But I do want to get that out for the viewers.
I think that's really important, Gary. So
Yeah.
let's talk about it.
Oh.
If you have something that you think needs to come to the Ethics Commission, there's a conflict of interest, there's a lobbyist gift, something, or you're just not sure. The Commission accepts complaints really in any form, a phone call, an email. We do have a form that you can fill out on our website, which is ethicscommission.nd.gov. You can find the little frowny face. I don't know if you can see that. That's our operations administrator having some fun with our little frowny face. You can go ahead and click File a Complaint, and then you can fill out your information. It is a really self-explanatory form, but it also has some information about what you need, what information would be helpful. We also do maintain a confidential hotline that individuals can call and provide us information with. That goes directly to me and to our general counsel, so individuals can do it that way.
So if it's confidential, so if Gary picks up the phone, calls the office, comes to some particular individual, that doesn't become public as far as me or the person at the other end, unless till you determine there's something to go forward with, correct?
That's correct, Gary. So in fact, a complaint, back in 2019, the legislature put the confidentiality in place for complaints, and a complaint stays confidential until there is a finding of an ethical violation. And so the individual who files the complaint can choose to remain confidential, so we don't even share their information with the individual against whom they filed a complaint, and they can keep that confidence, right? We maintain their confidence. And then let's say that there is no ethical finding, right? Just, I believe it was at the Commission's last meeting, they made a finding of a non-violation, right? That there was a complaint that was brought forward, it was investigated, but there was no ethical violation, so that remains confidential.
I see. So if you complain against an individual and they actually find it wasn't, that name just stays confidential because it doesn't put it out there, because people right away go, oh, if somebody made the accusation, somebody's covered something up. So keeping that, that makes total sense to me.
It does. Now the individual the respondent, right, under the most recent set of legislation in 2025, now the respondent, meaning the person against whom the complaint is filed, they can talk about it finally. We had First Amendment concerns about not allowing them to talk.
Makes total sense. We're going to have you back. So I appreciate you educating the viewers of Open Range. So we've been talking to Rebecca Binstock, Executive Director of the North Dakota Ethics Commission. I'm your host, Gary